Good evening, everybody. I hope you can hear me well. I always like to start off talking very slowly. So the last few people who are coming in to the stadium, let's say, who are getting their meat pies, their bovril, making sure they've got their season ticket with them, getting ready to sit down for a fantastic match that we've got ahead for you. So we're just going to let the last few people, I can see people on my screen joining us on Facebook, joining us on YouTube, joining us on Zoom. I'm going to let everyone come in, settle in their seats for a few more seconds, and then we will start. Okay, good evening. Welcome to JW3, particularly those of you that haven't joined us before. My name is Raymond Simonson, and I'm very fortunate to be the CEO of JW3. This is a rare pleasure for me. I normally have to dress very smart in my job. I don't often get to wear an old England kit for a night like this, but it felt like it was the appropriate thing to wear, right? So if you don't know, JW3 is the only Jewish community centre and arts and cultural venue of its kind in the UK. Despite closing our doors to our physical venue with a very heavy heart in the middle of March, we have in fact stayed open online during this entire lockdown period, bringing hundreds of hours of online content, of programming, of talks and classes and discussions and debates and entertainment and comedy and music and family activities and LGBTQ programs and much more every single week to thousands and thousands of people, of which I'm very proud. And at the same time, you might have heard that we have been running an emergency food bank from our community centre on the Finchley Road. If you're one of the people that has been donating food, or if you're one of our volunteers that's been coming in and has helped us sort, pack and deliver over 25,000 meals to local people in need, then I'd like to thank you very much. I think one of our guests this evening, John Smith, might be delighted to know that the Arsenal Football Foundation have provided us over 6 tons of that food over the recent weeks. So even as a Spurs fan, I'm going to say well done, Arsenal, for that. So we are still working really hard on our plans for a phased reopening of the physical centre. And I can't wait to welcome you all back in person from a very safe social distance at some time in the near future. If you want to be amongst the first people to find out what's going on and when we're opening our doors, make sure you go to the JW3 website and register to receive our newsletters. That's the best way to really keep in touch. So until we open those doors, we are going to continue with our fantastic program of online events designed to enlighten, inspire, educate and entertain you. And that brings us to tonight's event, which I'm really personally very excited about. We have 2 fantastic guests with us. We have John Smith, who you will know as a motivational speaker, as most people know him as the first sports super agent, who's worked with some of the biggest sports stars in the world, including, of course, Diego Maradona, Sebastian and as I just learned, Harry Redknapp. He's managed the off-pitch activities of the England football team for about 10 years or so, ultimately leading to the creation of Team England, which he must be very proud of. That's the vehicle used by the Football Association and the England football team, and they still use it to this date. He was also the first commercial representative of the England cricket team, the first promoter of the North American sports in the UK. So if you like your basketball or your American football and you've watched it in the UK, that's the man you have to thank for that. He owned the London Monarchs, which I actually went to see at Wembley in the only American football game I've ever been to. And I know many of you watching will have read his autobiography, which he published only 4 years ago, called The Deal. So we're going to welcome any minute now onto the screen, John Smith, and he is going to be in conversation with a fantastic sports journalist who many of you know, Sarah Shephard, who's written for The Times, the Sunday Times, The Guardian and more. A few years ago, she was named the Journalist of the Year at the Women's Sports Trust Awards. She's also the author of Kicking Off, How Women in Sports Are Changing the Game. And incredibly, she's just had, only during lockdown in June, her latest book, which was published, called Born Fighter, which is the incredible true story of Roxana Begum, who's an East London girl from a traditional British Bangladeshi background, who went on to become a Muay Thai world champion. Fascinating stuff. It's available from all good bookshops and any online booksellers at the moment, so I recommend you get a copy of that. John and Sarah are now going to join us on the screen. I'll hand over to them in a moment. They're going to give their view on what the future holds. They're going to uncover the arcane mystery of signing footballers, something I'm interested in. I'm hoping I might hear some hot gossip about who Spurs might be signing this summer because maybe there's some news there I might hear, who knows. And there will be an opportunity for any of you watching to ask questions. If you are with us right now on the Zoom, then please, at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a Q&A. Ignore the chat box, go to the Q&A, and at any time over the next 45 minutes, please type your questions in. One of our moderators behind the scenes is going to sift through them, and we'll try and have half an hour or so of Q&A at the end. So please type them in. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, go to the comment section, type your questions in. We usually can't get through all the questions. We have so many. We'll try and get through as many as we possibly can. So until then, I'm just going to hand over to John and Sarah, but I'm going to be a little bit cheeky because I didn't prepare them for this. I just want, as I hand over to them, as they introduce themselves, I want them to tell us first, what was the last live match you went to? What was the last live match in real life, not behind a screen? Can you remember it? Was it recently? Was it since lockdown ended? Or was it many months ago? What was the last live match you went to? I'm going to slip into the shadows and let you answer that to each other, and then we'll kick off from there. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Raymond. Hi, everyone. My name's Sarah, as Raymond said. So the last game I actually went to watch wasn't that long ago. It was Luton Town's final game of the season, which they needed to win to stay up against Blackburn Rovers. And I was sent to cover that by my editor at The Athletic as part of a special piece that we were doing where we had a journalist at every game on that crazy last night of the Championship. And I was sent to Luton, which is handily not that far from where I live. So yeah, it was an interesting experience, my first experience of football behind closed doors, but luckily Luton got the win, so it was quite a good night. How about you, John?
Hi, Sarah. Hello, everybody. Good evening. The last live game I saw was actually up in Scotland. It was a night out with some friends of mine at Hibernian, and we were talking about. There's a story that goes with this, but I won't tell you now. But it's all to do with North Korea. We can talk about it later. But that was my last game. It must have been mid-February, just a couple of weeks in front of lockdown.
Nice. February in Scotland. Well, I think we're going to have to come back to that because that sounds like a good story to me. But the first place I wanted to start was actually with my very well-thumbed copy of the book, which has been out, I think, 4 years now.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's a fascinating insight for anyone who's not read it into the machinations of being a football agent and everything that John achieved in his career, which Raymond kind of touched upon. But I guess the best place to start is a bit of a, an opening into who you are and how you got into it. So I know it's quite a story, but how did you originally get into the world of being a football agent?
Okay, well, very briefly, I was in the record business. I was one of the guys behind what was lovingly known as Northern Soul for many years, and I sold that business in 1981. I went to live in America for a wee while, living in LA, and I just loved what they were doing in sport in America, which was much more. I mean, football was my other passion other than music. Football in the 80s wasn't great. I mean, people were dying in stadia. It was, pretty horrible stuff. Much as the game was good. So I came back eventually in the mid 80s with this desire to make English football be what I thought it could be, which was the entertaining platform of all time. And it was inspired by, you can see from the shirt at the back, I do come from the red part of North London, even though I've probably done more deals with the white part of the blue part of North London than I have done with the red part. It was inspired actually by my childhood, a wonderful player I used to watch when I was a little boy called Alan Skirton. And I always wanted to be Alan Skirton. I was a right winger and he was a right winger, and I wanted to be that player. And then he stopped playing. And when he stopped playing, he became a milkman. And on his round was Highbury. And I thought, this just isn't right. This is the man who I adored, hero worshipped. And some years later, he's on the outside, as opposed to being lauded by 70,000 people as it was then inside. And I just wanted to put that right. And I think, short story, I think that's what we've done with the Premier League.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard for me to imagine a time where football wasn't considered entertainment, but I guess when you first got into it, it really wasn't.
Well, it was always, and still lovingly called, the working man's sport. So it was something where your neighbour's mate played football. But it was always a business, but it was never a business for the footballers. It was a business for the people that owned the clubs. And when I started in '86 in football, one of my avowed intentions was to change that. And I always believed that the be the Beatles of our time, because they were absolutely idolized by so many people. I mean, it was hero worship beyond hero worship. I remember, Sarah, some years later, I was at Spurs, and I was quite friendly with Ozzy Ardiles at the time because my relationship with Maradona, which came through him. And Phil Collins was in the at Tottenham, and I was chatting with Phil Collins, and he looked at me and he went, "Look, there's Ardiles." I went, "Yeah." Can you introduce me? I went, "Hang on, you're Phil Collins. Can't you just?" No, it's Ardiles. And that's the sort of thing that I wanted to capture.
Yeah. And when you think back, what was your first deal?
The first big one, the first notable one was Peter Beardsley. Peter Beardsley going from Newcastle to Liverpool. Kenny Dalglish was on the other side, and we couldn't. It had been mooted for a while, and it was the first really big public deal. Peter had performed so well in the World Cup, and it was just it was going to happen, but it couldn't happen. And we were £40,000 apart on his package, which in those days was an awful lot of money. And I remember Kenny, he was on the other side, saying to me, because he didn't ask for a transfer, why don't you ask them for a loyalty payment to go? And we did, and ultimately they did, and it was the beginning of loyalty payments. It was the first time. And then he went to Liverpool, and obviously he was a hero there, so that all worked quite well in the end.
Yeah. What did the world of football agents look like at that time? I'm imagining it was vastly different to how it looks today.
Yeah, it was much smaller. I mean, there are now the new licensing that's coming in, I think, is looking at something like 2,000 football agents in England alone.
Oh.
Of which, to be honest, Sarah, there will be, of the 2,000, probably 1,987 won't do very much. Yeah. But the top 10 will do very well, and they're the ones that everybody quotes about. So it was very different. It was still a sport. I think 1992 when we changed it it became, through people like David Dean, Philip Carter, to a much lesser degree me, and Rupert Murdoch, we turned it into the Premier League. And at that point, the sport became a business, and that was the change of everything.
Yeah. And you ended up, the book kind of explains, sort of almost ensconced with Bobby Robsons' England team at one point, which, for an agent is quite bizarre to think about, that an agent would get that close to an England team as a whole. What are your sort of standout memories from that period?
Actually, that was probably the best revolution of the moment. I love Bobby. I cherish his memory. I could not have done what we did without him. Football would be poorer without him, both as a game and commercially. When I fortunately took over the England football team in 1986, 87, I had this great vision of wanting to do what they do in America. And I had with me guys I'd made friends with at places like the Mars Corporation and Coca-Cola. And we brought those into the England team, and we had to fight the FA every corner of the way because Umbro had complete control of the FA, and they paid one check and that was it. And the players got paid £15 to play for England, which nobody minded. It was an honour to play for England. The money was neither here nor there. But I had this desire that I could make them £1 million if we did this right, and I could make them iconic. And so we brought these wonderful sponsors on board, and Bobby allowed me to play, I guess. I mean, there were things that we used to do, and if anyone's got an old VCR and you've got some of the tapes, you have to look back at some of this stuff. Because of Umbro and the FA, we weren't allowed to do anything. So I got Coke to advertise on the boards around wherever England played, and Bobby allowed me to tell the team before the game where the boards were, so that when they scored, they could run to the boards and celebrate in front of a Coca-Cola board. And so you'll see footage of these players in the 80s scoring, kind of, and looking around, all asking each other, where's the board? And then sprinting maybe 70 yards down the pitch to celebrate in front of it, which I thought was fabulous. And it was just a bit silly and a bit revolutionary, but it worked. And Coca-Cola said to me, well, it's good fun, looks good, but they all celebrated in front of the board and nobody could see the advert. So Paul Gascoigne piped up at that point and said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to dive in front of the board and everyone can dive on top of me. And that's what happened. And kind of that's how diving started. And Coke loved it. And we did some great, fun, silly things. And it led to people like Coca-Cola sponsoring English football. So it was good.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing to be able to get, the players to do that, and the manager as well to buy into it is yeah, I'm not sure that would be the same thing today.
A bit more sophisticated. I mean, we did have one silly one as well. Because Umbro were there, and they were aggravating us a lot, even though we love them now. Well, we used to love them when they existed before they became Nike. But they were aggravating us at the time, wouldn't allow us to do anything. So some of the players were sponsored by Nike, and we used to get the players to run. And when there was a substitution, Sarah, we'd ask the player to just run on the pitch and stop. Because at that time, the cameraman, the producer of the TV signal, the cameraman only had one shot. The players left the field, but he always came off first. We made sure he came off first. Then the oncoming player came on, and he stopped about 5 yards inside the white line to tie his bootlaces up. And it was the only shot the cameraman had. And of course, it pans on his Nike boots. And nobody ever asked the question, why didn't they tie their boots up before they got on the field to play? But we got away with that as well.
That's excellent. And you obviously, over the course of your career, you'll have dealt with the chief execs at probably every single big club that there is. Who were the ones that you really enjoyed doing deals with? Whether that's because, not necessarily because they made it easy, but because, the whole negotiating process was quite, challenging, but in a fun sort of way. Who were the ones that kind of you really enjoyed dealing with?
Liverpool were always magnificent. They had a guy, Peter Robinson, as I remember, at the time, who was followed some years later by a whole bunch of other people, including Rick Perry. But Liverpool were always user-friendly. Tottenham under Alan Sugar were really difficult. He had an acerbic sense of humour, which kind of made it a little bit more acceptable, but he was very, very hard work. But I mean, it was intimidating because he's brighter than all of us, and so it was you always had to be on top of your game when you went to see Alan Sugar. Arsenal was always interesting because they try to do things by the book, and not that you shouldn't, but sometimes when deals get stuck, you have to be a little bit creative. Manchester United had a really good lawyer that ran everything for them under Alex Ferguson, and a guy called Maurice Watkins, who's now chair of British Swimming. And Maurice was incredibly bright but very fair. And then there was Ken Bates, who was fascinating.
I've heard lots of stories about Ken Bates.
Yeah, there are a few. And I have to say, I have nothing but love and affection for Ken, because he always dealt with me very fairly. But he was, the four-letter words proliferated the first 10 minutes of you being with him, and it was always challenging.
Yeah. And I know you've also done deals all around the world in some interesting scenarios and places that are culturally very, very different. What would you say were kind of the big lessons that you learned over your years of doing deals in all kinds of different situations?
You learn about national characteristics in some regards, and although people are individuals, the national characteristics seem to flow in an abundance. So you get to Italy, for instance, and inevitably the wrangling gets a little bit emotional, and very often, Sarah, they just walk out. And the first time it happened, you think, oh my God, what do I do? What do I do now? They're going to go, I'm going to lose the deal. And actually, it's not really a walkout. It's a stage walkout, but they don't really want to go.
Right.
So fortunately, the very first time I had a spluttering of, but hang on, just before you go. After that, I realized that I could let them get very close to the door and always have something else in my back pocket. And because they didn't really want to go, it was a breakthrough moment. And it's like I learned various negotiating tactics, things like when you're one-to-one with some of these big, powerful chief executives, people who are, globally dominant, I could, and I'm a little football agent by comparison, I could stare them in the eye. I was taught this, never to look in people's eyes when you're one-to-one with someone, but look at the bridge of their nose. And I could look at these forever, and I could sit there very calmly and pause and wait and let them wait for my words. And then I'd feel like a little element of control. And it's all about controlling the environment that you're in. You've got so much money that you want, and they've got so much money they can give you, and there's going to be a gap. So it's just how you close that gap. And you need to earn a bit of respect from the other side first. And if they ask you awkward questions on things and bits and whatever, I always made the excuse. I had a briefcase sort of in the corner somewhere, gave me the ability to stand up and walk to the briefcase and think about the answer when I didn't know it. So little tricks like that, over the years, which were quite fun.
Yeah, that was fascinating. And you've talked a bit in the book, actually, about your dealings with Diego Maradona and how that all came about and how it played out. Just tell us, how you came to work with Diego.
It was a bizarre set of circumstances. I'd been in business for a wee while. We had the England team, and I'd heard that Osvaldo Ardiles was a very bright lawyer and was interested in doing more than just playing football, although he loved his game, and that was the most important thing to him. And I'd arranged to meet him, and sadly, the first two occasions I couldn't get there. The first was a hold up on the M25, and the second was something else happened. And on the third occasion I got there, it was a little cool because I'd cancelled two before, a nice little chit chat, whatever. And then about 10 or 15 minutes into the conversation, the phone rang and he picked it up, and I can hear this big conversation in Spanish going on. And I popped to the loo at the time, and he put his hand over the phone and said, "Diego." And I went, okay, not knowing who Diego might be. Came out of the loo, and he put his arm over the phone again and said, "How do you fancy working with me managing Maradona? Because he's upset with his action." I said, "What do you expect?" "Yes, please, thank you, and I love you." And that's how it happened. Had I gone those first two occasions, I would have missed the call. So maybe Beshed.
Yeah. And you brought him over here at one stage, didn't you?
We brought him over here a few times, and he was lovely. Diego was, and I think someone said it in the film about him recently. He was two people. He was Diego and he was Maradona.
Yeah.
And when he was out in public, he was Maradona, and he had to perform like Maradona. I remember when he was at Napoli, I managed to get him special dispensation to drive his Ferrari collection through the streets of Napoli without stopping at red traffic lights, because he'd stop and people would jump all over his cars and smash him up. And so one of the things that we managed to do for him. I also got him his first Coke deal. That's the black stuff, not the white.
Yeah.
But he was lovely. As Diego, he was lovely. He was just a really warm character. And Sarah, sometimes people walk in a room and you don't know who they are or whatever. And bear in mind, Diego was 5'1". I mean,
yeah.
Small. But you just looked, because I think God sprinkles a bit of special dust on some people.
Yeah. And
I work in another world. I worked with Mikhail Gorbachev, and he had the same, just a complete pizzazz about his persona. And so Diego was that, and he was a lovely young lad, and we laughed and we joked and we had good fun, and we went out and partied when he was here. And then unfortunately he got taken over by some other folk. The
Asif Kapadia documentary, is that the one that you're? It's brilliant. If anyone's not seen it yet, do seek it out, because it's absolutely fascinating, and it gives you a real insight into the madness that his life descended to. And I just found myself wondering, how was he able to still perform at such a level when he was filling his body with all these drugs? You just wonder what he would have been without them.
He was, I mean, I'm biased, but he was, for me, the greatest footballer ever. I mean, Pele was fantastic, but it was at a time when maybe it was easier to be fantastic. in those days. The pressure on Diego to perform was so intense, and yet he delivered time and time and time again. There's a lovely YouTube piece of footage of him warming up before one of the Napoli games, playing Keepy Uppy while he's signing autographs. I mean, you try doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen Santi Cazorla juggling a ball before, and he was, I'm sure, I don't know if the same level, but he was equally it was just effortless, and both feet were equally magical.
I've seen actually the best one for me. I mean, obviously Diego's great. The best one for me at that was actually Kanu. I've seen him juggle. We were at his house, and we were talking about stuff, whatever, and he was drinking Coke, and then he crumpled the can, and we made to go out, and he stood up and he threw the can up in the end. He started playing Keepy Uppy with a broken Coca-Cola can. I mean,
he had super glue on his boots, I'm sure of it, because he never lost the ball.
He had size 15 feet, which helped. But
yeah, absolutely. I wanted to kind of go through the machinations of a player transfer deal. I mean, I know it varies, it's all individual, but in general, can you kind of talk us through, from your side of things, how it sort of worked?
Okay, this is not there's no normal, but if you had to pick out a sort of pathway, it would go something like this. So we're now in, I don't know, let's say we're now in February, and inevitably the big deals are talked about way back. In 5-year deals under the Bosman regulation, you don't let the players' contracts run down to 2 years, because they can see the end game and you lose your transfer fee, and also the value drops. So let's say we're 3 years out, and there's been some chat, and there's a couple of clubs interested in your player, and you know that, and he knows that. And then we have this ridiculous situation at the FA where they have something called rule, I think it's K5. I used to call it K9 because I thought it was a top of a regulation. I think it's K5, I think. But anyway, technically the agent's not allowed to talk to it's a bit like the estate agent being not allowed to talk to the next house you want to buy. Yeah. So yeah, but you do. And obviously sometimes you go beyond that, and if it's all getting a little bit difficult, you start planting stories in the media, and now of course you've got social media, which you can drive a whole different storyboard. Mm-hmm. But let's assume this one's walking in a straight line, and so it's now February, you start talking, March runs into April, runs into May, you're now into the nitty-gritty of the finances. So let's say he's a top player and he's going to look for circa 100 grand a week, a bit like Willian at Arsenal. Now, I'm not saying this is Willian's deal, but this is, that kind of number. Inevitably, it's actually not 100 grand a week. It's probably something like 60 or 70. I'm not saying in Willian's case, it may be, but inevitably you hear things like, oh, he's on 120 grand a week. He's probably not. He's probably on 60, 70, 80 with bonuses. Right. And then the bonuses can be scoring bonuses, assist bonuses, which are always fairly difficult, but there's so much footage now, and Y-Scout and companies like that gather all this data, so you can see and you can accurately plan and actually accurately tell how many assists he's had, first assist, second assist. And then there's times when, and I think I may be doing myself a particular overservice, but I think the first time this happened is under Arsenal, when we were getting a nice player, nice young lad called Alexander Chleb into Arsenal. And we were quite far apart. He had German agents and we were in the middle of it. We were quite far apart. And I suggested at the time that, I think we're about 30 grand a week apart. Right. Why don't you pay him 30 grand every time you pick him? And Arsenal and the team at the time thought about it. And anyway, they came back with a convoluted version of it. And the reason I wanted that is that I thought they're just buying him. They're not going to pick him. Mm. So the likelihood is that he'll get his 30 grand a week, and then it's up to him. If he does well, he'll get it every week. If he doesn't do well, then he won't. But that sort of set a trend. And now very often you get players' contracts, and we sort of tried to achieve this over the years, where they get a bonus if they're in the starting lineup. They get a bonus if they're not in the starting lineup, but they come on in the second half. and they get a bonus in some cases at the 60th minute. That's become a good one, the 60th minute. Look how many clubs substitute in the 61st, 62nd, 63rd minute, because they haven't quite had to pay the summer money from before. And sometimes the 70th, and it even got into, if he came on at all, which meant the player who had actually had a really good training week, the manager could reward him with, go on, son, have a run in for the last 2 or 3 minutes and earn another 20 grand. So, there's all sorts of convolutions that go into that deal. And then, of course, you've got the years, how many years it's going to be, and if you're going to put a price on him going. So, in other words, it's a big transfer. It's 70 million or whatever it might be. So he can go if somebody bids 80 million, which happens now quite regularly. And then there's the other bits and pieces. Occasionally housing pops up. That's mainly in Europe as opposed to here, because it's taxed as a benefit in kind of over here. And there's travel for the family and bits and stuff and kind of bolt-ons. Yeah. And this little thing called image rights can find its way into the contract, which is basically, in particular, an overseas player who says, my image is owned by a company in Argentina. The revenue until very recently had a top line figure on it of 17% of your contract could legitimately go into an image rights transaction. That's changed, and I'm not quite sure what the figure is now. I think it's relatively arbitrary, but it's not much. It's not, certainly no more than that. But you can play with things like that as well, which makes it tax efficient.
Yeah. It sounds like contracts have got a lot more complex since you first started this job.
Yeah, it's like everything else, it's now a big business.
Yeah. One of the deals that I remember reading about in the book, partly because I'm an Arsenal fan, and I remember the day it happened, it was the Arshavin deal.
It was done here on this.
Really? Because that was the snow we had.
Yeah, we were all snowed in. Yeah, that had been going for months. My brother Phil, it was really his deal. I mean, he got Arshavin through a friend of his who he played football with, and then it ended up with Arsene, and Arsene wanted him, and then Arsene scouted him about 40 or 50 times before they actually signed him, and then it all got very convoluted at the end, because the Russians, they were at 15 million. Arsenal, I think, started originally at 7. So there was a long way apart, and it didn't actually close much until deep into January. But I still wasn't really worried, because I thought, well, it's going to be, he needs to go. The club want him, it'll end up being north of 10. They'll come down to 12 and there'll be something like that. And it never happened that way. And right to the very end of January, there was a lovely man working for the St. Petersburg club. He was the chief executive of Zenit, called Max Mitrofanov. And then he kind of disappeared, and it got taken. This is Putin's club, by the way. The boy, he supported Zenit. And suddenly the chief executive of Gazprom turned up, and he was the negotiator. And the previous week, I think he cut the gas supply to the Ukraine. I mean, it was that right up there, and he's being a football agent this week. And he was very, very austere and very difficult, and wouldn't budge an inch. In fact, the price went up when he came involved, because he said, Arshavin borrowed some money from us and we want it back. So it was really difficult. But in the end, cut a long story short, we managed to fly him over. They gave us permission to fly him over for a medical, which in my mind said they were going to change the price in the last day or so, with 2 days before the window closed. So we flew him over, and we said to Arshavin, we put him in the village hotel in Elstree. We said, please don't go out. It's snowing anyway, so, because we don't want people to see you. And the following morning, all over the papers was him on his phone outside doing whatever, surrounded by fans. So we've kind of blown that secrecy.
Yeah.
But by that time, he was here, he passed his medical, and I thought, by the Russians had said by 3 o'clock our time, because they're 3 hours in front, we'll let you know the final price. And I thought, well, we're not far. Arsenal, by this time, we're up at 12 or 13 million. So we weren't that far apart. Anyway, they absolutely hardened. At 3:30, they came back and said, no change. It's 15 million plus this expense. So Arsenal went up a little bit, And with about an hour to go, I thought, our commission's going to be quite big on this. So why don't we throw in the $1.2 million that we just to close the gap, and we can do this then. And we've got a great player, and Phil and he were getting on so well. So we did, and I think it was Ivan Gazidis' first week or something, and we told him, and I think it got mislaid in translation or something, and he thought that I'd cost him an extra 1.2 million, and he just went, "Oh, let's just get it done." And so for all my good intentions, it didn't cost me anything. But then we had the problem with communication, because we were now about 10, 15, not even that, probably 5 minutes away from deadline. And all we had to do was get a fax with a yes agreed from the Zenit club to Arsenal. And the Russian fax machine would not speak to the Arsenal fax machine. So we tried it here to my then fax here, and it didn't work. Something came through, it didn't have anything on it. And we're now down to 2 minutes to go. And I said to Max, who was now back in the room, just write me an email. Emails were just becoming things. Just email me agreed. And this email came in with 4 seconds left. And we threw it at the FA and we said, "They are, deal done." And we didn't know till the next day that the FA actually were going to agree with it. But by that time, we'd announced it. And it was going to be difficult for everybody to not agree it. It was that close, 4 seconds away. And FIFA changed the system after that. They brought in transfer matching system because of that.
Yeah, God.
Sorry, long story.
Incredibly stressful situation. One of the quite a hot topic at the moment, specifically around Arsenal, but it also happens clubs like Wolves. Certain agents are deemed as like really powerful within that one club. What's your kind of view on the way that that's happened with, like you said, there are only a few agents who we really hear about all the time involved with the biggest deals. Do you think that is a good, the industry has gone in a good direction with that, or would you rather it hadn't?
That's a very, very good question, Sarah. In one breath, it can't be healthy. But I know Jorge Mendes has done a fantastic job at clubs around Europe, in Moscow, with a couple of clubs over there, playing the similar role. And you have to say, he's done a grand job at Wolves. Mm. So, sometimes the guys who are that good for a real reason, because they've got access to the best players at the best deals. And, if I was a fan of Wolves, I'd love Jorge Mendes. So technically, I think there's got to be some rulings that have to police it. The policing of the regulations has been poor. Let's parking your question for a moment. The money that is pushed away by some of the international ownerships out of the country by overpaying third parties in the past, and pushed away into territories where the money police wouldn't want to go, like Iraq and Turkey and places like that. So it's easier to hit an agent with a silly little fine for not filling in the form right and say with the police, a bit like the Metropolitan Police saying we're solving lots of crime because we've stopped lots of motorists doing 33 miles an hour and 30. Yeah, it's not quite what people want to see. People want to see policing of the monies. And the new system that comes in next year, it might be pushed back a year because of COVID, that every single transfer and every single component part of that transfer has to be listed on the TMS system now, which is the one we just talked about after I showed him, transfer matching system. So any third party, any fourth party, any fifth party, and there's lawyers now and accountants on both sides and for the player. There can be, 10, 12 people in a transfer deal now.
Yeah.
Everyone's got to be part of that. So I'm hoping that will be a lot more transparent.
Yeah, transparency is the one, the big thing that's been missing, isn't it, from a lot of these big deals. I wanted to kind of touch on recent stuff, because obviously this year has changed football, or it looks like it's going to change football in a big way. I guess first of all, like, given your background in football and entertainment, what have you made of football as a TV only product?
Look, can I take that question? Can I stretch it a little bit?
Yeah, of course.
Football finances are going to be the big issue now, for obvious reasons that clubs will not be able to have spectators probably till that side of the new year. And if there is a spike, possibly longer. So for the lower clubs, it's potentially Armageddon. I mean, if you are a Notts County or something like that, I don't know how you exist. And I'm reasonably friendly. I have a lot of time, a lot of respect for Oliver Dowden. I've known Oliver for a long time. He happens to be my local MP as well. And we've had various conversations with him and some of the people at DCMS. There's not a great appetite yet from the British government to support football as such. They think football should support football. Mm. Now, I can't see that happening because the clubs, even at the top, are going to have dramatic effects. I mean, I worked out the other day that Tottenham Hotspur, for instance, circa, they must have lost just this season, since we shut down in the end of March, they must have lost in terms of executive box income they'd have to give back. That's on nobody's P&L. Season tickets, revenue from bits of merchandise and stuff, and beer sales, and so on and so on. And that doesn't even include the advance monies they may well have got from a caterer buying in to the Tottenham Hotspur contract for 3 years, 5 years, however long that contract may be. It's going to be in excess of £20 million, and that's a big number. So football at the top has got its own issues. The good news, I think, is that broadcast is strong. If you look at the cup final last week, 8.2 million, 1 in every 2 viewers of television programming that time of night on Saturday watched the FA Cup final. And that's great viewing figures. Now that tells me that the broadcasters haven't really got a big argument about, it's not the same without the crowds. They're getting bigger audiences, and therefore they must be getting bigger, or will get bigger, ad revenues because of that.
Yeah.
So I think that bit's fairly safe. Come down the pile, the Championship's always, the lunatic asylum anyway. Everyone desperate to try and get to the Premier League, so they're throwing stupid money at it. And unless the EFL can police FFP, financial fair play, you can see it's a complete mess at the moment. And they need to police ownership. Look what's happening at Wigan and Sheffield Wednesday and Charlton. So they've got the issue that the Championship is fantastic, one of the best leagues in the world, but it's got real financial structural issues. Below that, unfortunately, there are a lot of basket cases. And I'm not sure, as I sit here today on the 6th of August, how the Notts Counties, the Darlingtons, all those clubs down there are going to survive in the form that they are in today. Will there be a full-time 3rd or 4th division in English football? I'm really not sure.
Yeah, that the sort of that pyramid, changing or not existing is just it's unthinkable, really.
Well, they're going to put wage caps into Div 3 and 4, Div 2 and 3, with the old 3 and 4. Championship, we're going to resist that. Premier League will resist it. There's going to be change. There's going to have to be change. Yeah. Because no one knows how long the COVID effect is going to last. And it's a bit like taxation. Once taxation goes up, it doesn't very often come down. Yeah. Once things have changed, they normally stay changed, and they progress from that point. So I am fearful for the lower leagues. I'm fearful that the rich clubs like Sheikh Mansour at Man City can go out. He's got how many? 7 clubs now. He could go around Europe, or his agent or his people can go around Europe and pick up all the players not all, some of the players of his choice, who clubs are going to have to get off of their balance sheet for that wage, and pick them up really cheaply and harvest them at the City Club in New York or City Club in Melbourne or Japan or wherever it might be. Yeah. So you're going to have, I remember talking to Liverpool, and because I've got some big funds behind me that lend money into sporting franchises, and I spoke to Liverpool at the start of the pandemic, and I said, how do you, it's Peter Moore, who's I think he's just leaving now. He's been replaced by Billy, I'm trying to think his surname now. Anyway, Billy, nice guy, who actually lives in Hampstead. But I remember Peter said to me at the time, he said, we've got enough money for this pandemic and the next one. So, you've got these behemoths at the top, and the have-nots. lower down. And, even the lower Premier League clubs are going to struggle unless they can balance the finances.
Yeah, well, I think one of the biggest stories this week, I work for The Athletic, and we put a story up today about Arsenal announced yesterday they were making 55 people redundant. And that story has had, I think, over 250 comments. It's a really emotive, divisive thing when people hear that a Premier League football club is making 55 people redundant, a club that's owned by a billionaire. I mean, is that something that surprised you, or did you see something like that coming? Because I think Arsenal's match day revenue is like 24% of their overall revenue. It's one of the biggest. So maybe it's not that surprising, but when you think about the money that they have at the top and the money that obviously goes into player wages, etc., it feels quite difficult to stomach, doesn't it?
Yeah, look, you have to balance. Each club is to their own. I have a lot of time for David Sullivan at West Ham, and he wears West Ham on his heart, and he gambled a huge amount of money, 100 million and some, more than that, to back the last management regime, which didn't work. But that was David. He desperately wanted it for the club, for the supporters, and everything else. That is David Sullivan. Now walk across London and go to Arsenal. That's not Kroenke's model. Arsenal is, and as much as I'm a supporter of them, and I'm not criticizing them for this, but they are an American corporate subsidiary. That's what they are, and they're run extremely well as an American corporate subsidiary. So although the optics look dreadful on the day that Willian signs potentially for £100,000 a week, and the players get their money back having partly furloughed, if you like, that they're cutting 55 jobs. Did it surprise me? No, not at all. Now, I like to think that Arsenal is more than a football club. It's part of the community of North London. It's part of a genre that says that my dad supported it. I supported Arsenal. My kids support Arsenal. Both Ross and Scott are, you cut them, they bleed red. We are Arsenal, and their kids will support Arsenal as well. So it's a bit more than an American corporate subsidiary. And I think there is a balance there somewhere where football clubs, and I kind of wanted to get this message to Oliver Dowden as well. From a political standpoint, you start losing clubs on your red curtain. Macclesfield, Chesterfield, Hull, all those, because they're going to go bust. They take the community, and they take the community vote with them. And I think Arsenal have to think twice about a different way of balancing those books, because the optics just don't look right. I'm not critical of them. They are doing a great job running a successful business. Full stop. The next paragraph just begins, but it's a bit more than that, isn't it?
Yeah. It's not black and white. I understand that. All right. I think it's probably time that we should take some questions. I could keep asking you questions all night, but I should probably hand over to the audience. I think Raymond's going to pass them through.
Hello. So people are happy for the question to be asked by me, so I'm just going to pass on the question, if that's all right with you. So let's go first. We've got Sam Marcus, who is age 13, who's watching and really enjoying this. And although he's too young to remember the 86 World Cup, he's got a question for you, John, about the quarterfinal. And I think you know what's coming. He wants to know, what was your reaction to that Maradona goal? Now, he could be talking about the wonder goal, but I suspect he's talking about the handball. What was your reaction?
I not surprisingly didn't speak to Diego that much about that, although we did touch on it a couple of times, and every time I mentioned the hand of God, he said, "John," he's bad. He spoke very bad English. "John," he said, "forget the hand of God. What about the feet of God?" So
Makes sense.
It was wrong. It was proven to be wrong. I brought Diego over to watch an England game, the beginning of the next season, and he went round and apologized to most of the team, shook their hand and said, sorry. So, I guess we move on.
Reg Morris. Reg Morris wants to know, as an agent, what do you think of the loan system that takes the goalie from Manchester United on loan to Sheffield and before that to my hometown Shrewsbury?
Look, the loan system is what's going to play this summer. That's because of the shortage of cash generally. There's going to be a lot of swaps. There's going to be a lot of loans. And really, Reg, you know, it's an interesting question because it's actually not as regulated as the transfer market is. And it will be. It's going to, and the new regulations, it is. And you're only allowed to loan. For instance, I mean, I think Chelsea have an arrangement with Arnhem in Holland. They had players going backwards and forwards all the time. You'll only be allowed to do 2 with a club you have a relationship with, or 3, I think. The goalposts seem to move regularly on that one. But before it comes in, there will be a figure. So I think, yeah, it is a good question. It's not really easy to answer because what it does do, it facilitates the movement of players without the transfer of cash, and that's going to become, unfortunately, the order of the day, especially in this particular window.
Great, thank you. Avi, who is a Man United fan, wants to know what you think about Marcus Rashford and the wonderful work he's been doing, the campaigning work that he's been doing. And is that a kind of model of the modern footballer against the stereotype of the Flash Harry?
I know a lot of very wonderful footballers. And I've met many of them over the years. Even going right the way back to when I was looking after the England team, we gave a lot of money to charity and we did it very quietly, never talked about it. And in the days when Brian Robson would get some bagged stick and whatever, and I'd sit there and I'd say to the lads at the next gathering, can we come out and talk about the charity bit, please? Can we just say, and we know you went out drinking and you shouldn't have done that night, but can we tell the world, please, what you did do the previous week? And the boys said, no, it's not. We don't do that. And Rashford was timely. Rashford was appropriate. Rashford hit absolutely the public nail on the head because it was an emotional moment, and he was absolutely spot on with what he was trying to achieve, and that was proven to be the case. And if he is the one person that makes people stop and think a minute about footballers, then I'm delighted. I mean, I don't know him that well. I think I've met him sort of once at a reception. He seemed very nice and charming at the time. But, he's a lovely boy. He's got 2 nice brothers. They come from a nice family and they're good guys. I can replicate that statement probably 1,000 times across football. But people don't really want to know. They want to know when they screw up. They don't really want to know. It's a sad thing about media, I guess, not just our media, but media generally. Actually,
the fellow Arsenal supporter, Jonathan Friedland, the Guardian journalist, he had his Radio 4 Longview program, which anyone listening now, anyone watching this, should check it out on BBC iPlayer, BBC Sounds, because today's one, it was all about sports people over the years who have given generously and campaigned and got involved. And he starts talking about Marcus Rashford, but he actually goes back to many years ago. And actually, this is quite a long tradition, but it doesn't really necessarily suit the media narrative of the footballer. But anyway, it's really worth checking out.
And by the way, a lot of the players, like we mentioned Carnu before, Sarah, a lot of the people like Carnu, Michael Essien. Michael Essien's got a huge charitable foundation, and he sent a lot of money. I mean, 7-figure sums back to Africa, but no one ever talks about it. They just quietly do it.
Now I've got a question here for Sarah. Sarah, are you happy to take a question?
Yeah, of course.
This is from Susan in Golders Green, who said that she read that your gran is the reason you started getting into football, and that you also cover so many more sports, including boxing. But what's the most exciting event for you that you ever attended? Actually, let's ask you both that. Sarah first, what's the most exciting sporting event that you've ever attended? And then John, maybe you have time to think about that as well.
That is a really, really easy question for me because I was lucky enough to be at a magazine called Sport when the 2012 Olympics were on, and Sport covered everything. But I was kind of my beat was very much, tennis, athletics, and all the Olympic sports. So I got a press pass basically to the Olympic Games, and my editor just said to me on the first day, I remember him saying to me, off you go, I'll see you in 2 weeks. And it was a weekly magazine, which meant I didn't have to file daily. I literally had to file, maybe one piece a week if I got something good. So I got to go to whatever I fancied at the Olympics. I was like a kid in a candy store,
Amazing.
So, but obviously the most amazing night was Super Saturday. Just sitting and watching that unfold as a British sports fan was just the most surreal night I think ever. And then I was lucky enough to get some time with Jess Ennis the next day, which made the cover of the following week's magazine. So it was just the perfect fortnight for me, and I'll never forget it.
Amazing. John, before you answer, I as we mentioned the Olympics and great sporting events, and maybe this is your answer, but the taekwondo watching your team taekwondo team win 3 golds or 3 medals at the Rio Olympics, that must have been pretty special.
We did. Well, I was very honoured to be asked to be chair of British Taekwondo, and at the time it wasn't in great shape, and we turned it around. We raised quite a lot of money, and we created the Jade Joneses of this world, and we had a great Olympics. It was I was seriously proud. Latelo, Mohammed Latelo Mohammed. Latelo Mohammed, yeah. It's been a couple of years now. I stood down, I had my 5 years and stood down just after Rio. I saw him on that. Do you remember that night when he lost the gold in the last second?
Yeah.
No.
Some of my public speeches, I cite that as an example. Every second counts. And I saw him after he'd had his drugs test and everything, and he had this silver medal in the dressing room. I was fortunate enough to go back and see him. And he's in floods of tears, and he's just won a silver at the Olympics. And he says to me, "John, this is the worst day of my life." I mean, it was heartbreaking, but it just shows you every second counts. To answer the question, actually, my most emotional moment, apart from those moments, was probably David Weir at the Paralympics. Seeing somebody who's come with a disability to reach that zenith of his career in front of a home crowd. And Sarah, we've been in front of big stadia noises over the years. I have never heard anything when the entire stadium is behind one person.
Yeah.
It was you talk about the hairs, they do actually stand up at the back of your head, and I had a little tear in my eye somewhere, because it was just those moments.
John, I was there in the stadium for that, at the very, very top, very back row, and I'm a huge football fan. I've been to see England, and I've been to see the Spurs, and I've been to all over the world, and nothing will ever come close to that moment. And really, the hairs on the back of the end, and that was an incredible, emotional, people hugging and crying, and it was phenomenal. When sport can do that, isn't it great?
Yeah, and I remember the that week when Tottenham in the Champions League came from behind and Liverpool came from behind, and the emotion that was expended that week, and the week for me as a football didn't mean a great deal to me financially for either of them, but I loved the emotion of my friends, the Tottenham fans who had dreamt of this moment, and Poch, who I really liked very much, and seeing the emotion. And if you're not a football fan, you're not a sports fan, you don't get that. You don't, if you are not in our world or the world of sport, you are unfortunate that you miss a piece of life that is so deeply emotional. It's not like loving your mum and dad, of course it's not, but it's another love, it's another affection, and it's another emotion. And we are absolutely privileged to be part of it.
Amazing. Thank you. We got a question from Ben Goodman, who's 14 years old, also enjoying it. And he's obviously an Arsenal fan. And his question is, these are his words, not mine, due to the lack of creativity and multiple defensive errors, who do you think Arsenal should sign? And are you working on any deals that you can tell us about?
No, unfortunately, I'm not on front line anymore. So I'm probably not the best person to ask. He's absolutely right, though. I mean, Ben is absolutely right. I mean, I don't know whether you can get back to him and ask him what he thinks, who he thinks we should sign. But he's absolutely right. As an Arsenal supporter, the back line has been notoriously leaky and actually out of position most of the time, most of the season. And even at 2-0 up, you think we're going to give away 3 here. So yeah, it's something that they're going to have to work on. I think Martinez has done quite a good job there, by the way. I think he's holding his own. It looks very solid. And then number 3 keeper, who's now the number 2 keeper, is a good boy as well. So I think the goalkeeper position looks strong. I think they need pace in the back 4, and they need someone who can give them a attacking but defensive options. Somebody wide. You've got to, in a way, you'd like to say, tear it all up the back 4 and start again. But then you're into the Klopp type regime where it's going to take you 4 years to build a team from the back forward.
Oh, look, Ben's actually answered. Ben's responded. He said he'd like Carlos from Seville and Coutinho. There you go. Well, so if you can have a word with a few people, make it happen for Ben, that would be lovely.
Certainly do that. I mean, Carlos from Seville is a good shout. Coutinho, I'm really not sure. I'm really not. For me, the jury's out. It's quite interesting. Thanks, Ben.
Here's a question for both of you, for Sarah and John, if that's okay, if you both have an answer, which is from Howard, who would like to know, how do you think we could make the League Cup more interesting? It feels like just a burden to Premiership Cups, and too many of them don't take to Premiership clubs, and too many of them don't take it seriously.
I think they might this year, because I think they're going to need the money from the competitions, and I think they're going to need whatever revenue they can scrape up, even in the Premier League, as you can sort of come down the Premier League. It's not the most attractive cup, but the fact Man City go wild when they win it, it's got something about it, and it gives you a European position, and I just think that there's I think this year could be the year where it actually becomes more important purely from the financial point of view.
Sarah, do you have a view?
I quite enjoy it, because you normally get a chance to see clubs' young players. I remember the team that Liverpool put out. It's you don't often get a chance to see that many young players from the big clubs. So I quite enjoy that side of it. It's a bit different. So yeah, I don't really have an issue with it.
And as a sports writer, do you feel it gets covered in the same way, or it's the magic of the FA Cup, but you've been sent to the League Cup to cover it, or you quite like that?
It's definitely not in the same priority bracket as obviously league games and FA Cup, but they're generally still important games that we would always cover. They're still going to tell you something generally.
I think Sarah's answer is very relevant. I think you get to see the squad members that you don't see on other occasions. It gives them exposure. So I think that for me, that's a big plus factor as well.
And as a Spurs fan, I usually just get to see us knocked out by Chelsea in the semi-final. So that's what I'm used to. Now we have something. I hope I pronounced your name right, Mattia, I think. Did you think the Bosman ruling was a good thing? And Mattia's comment is that it made football a huge business and at the same time killed local football in many countries. So what do you think about that?
Well, this is a big question. Mattia, is that the right?
Mattia.
I was part of the whole thing, so I'm biased. I drove very, very hard for clubs not to have a lien on an employment contract once you are no longer employed. So it's a bit like if you're employed by JW3 and Maccabi want to nick you, want to take your services, JW3 has the right at the end of your 3-year contract to say to Maccabi, but he's not going unless you give us 50,000 shekels.
Will you do the deal for me?
Yeah, of course, with the greatest of pleasure, and if Sarah comes along as well. But if we go back to when that happened, it was an obvious. It had to happen. I think it also taught clubs discipline about how to run their contracts. It took a few years for them to learn that, but by year 4 or 5, they had got into a system whereby, as we said earlier when we were talking about the transfer deal, you got a 5-year deal, you start talking about it in year 3. Otherwise that clock runs down again. So I think it was obvious. It had to happen. But you know, there's solidarity payments. There's various other things. It shouldn't affect third world countries. It shouldn't affect other countries outside of the main dominant countries, because they've always got the right to sell. It just means you have to run it like a business. You can't run it as a local benefits society, which football clubs used to be. You know, they in the days I was growing up, they'd say, you know, Arsenal would be full, and it took 70,000 people, and they'd say, well, there were 45,000 there today, and you think, oh, who's got the rest of the money from all these other people? You know, they weren't run as proper businesses. They were run by the people who own them, for the people that own them. So we're getting there, and I think this was a significant moment in Bosman Roar, as was the advent of the Premier League in '92.
So Sarah asked you a question earlier about which clubs or which club chairs you like dealing with, and someone's asked specifically for your views on Daniel Levy. What's he like to deal with? This is a question from Anthony. Is he really like he's made out in the press? What can you tell us about Daniel Levy?
Well, I'm slightly biased because I like Daniel. I think he's brought financial discipline. I think if I have a criticism, and who the hell am I to criticize? He's a lot more successful than I am. The nickel and diming gets hard sometimes, but you know, he wants the best for his club, and he's never done anything other than do the best for Tottenham Hotspur. As he said at the celebratories when they built the new stadium and they left White Hart Lane, you know, he's only a custodian of the brand for a while, and I think he's under his stewardship. I think he's done a fantastic job. He's not the easiest to deal with, but then why would he be? You know, he's an intelligent negotiator. And he, the one thing he does it with charm. He's never rude. He's never abrasive. He's clever. He's tough. But he does it with a smile. I mean, we talked about Harry Redknapp before. That we were arguing once we'd done the deal for Harry. We were arguing about our commission, as you always do. And Daniel said, all right, I'll tell you what, you know, we were 50 grand apart, I think, at the time. And he said to me and my brother Phil, he said, just take a box. You know, we'll do the 50 but take a box. And my brother, who's quite a big Arsenal supporter, said, yeah, we'll take it providing it doesn't face the pitch. But anyway, we got through that line. Anyway, we did take the box. He did pay the 50,000, and then he invoiced us 55,000 for the box.
There's definitely been times in the last season where I wish, when I was at Spurs, that I was facing away from the ground. But I think we've got time just for this last question, which is a slightly cheeky one, which is probably why they've come in anonymously and said, do you, when you were making deals, did you ever have any bias towards Arsenal when you were trying to negotiate transfer deals? Did you ever try and persuade anyone to come to Arsenal because it was your club?
No, there is something rather special in taking a player to the club that you've supported and walking on the pitch and looking where you used to stand. In those days, I used to stand at the North Bank and thinking, God, I came from there to here, and it's rather lovely. But there was a big play. We were regularly breaking the British transfer record in the 80s and 90s, and I had Tony Cottee coming out of West Ham, and it was Arsenal or it was Everton. And we went to see Arsenal. I was desperate for him to go to Arsenal, but the deal wasn't right, and we ended up taking him to Everton, where actually I had one of my bestest ever moments, because it was a big thing at the time. There wasn't much news around that he was big news, and so he started on his debut, and he scored with his first touch. Literally his first touch, and I thought, okay, there you go, meant to be.
Amazing.
So, yeah, I enjoyed taking players to Arsenal. We've got people like Freddie Ljungberg and Kanu and a whole host of others, but it's got to be right. It's got to be right for everybody.
Amazing. Thank you both. Before we finish, I'd love to know if there's anything particular in the in terms of sport, any sport at all that you are looking forward to? These have been strange times for all sport these last 4 or 5 months. Is there anything particular you're looking forward to, that particular event or match or anything like that you're looking forward to getting back to when we're allowed?
From my point of view, I'm fascinated to see how rugby is going to deal with things like the scrum. I love football. It's my passion, that and music. I enjoy cricket. I was the Welsh rugby agent as well. Actually, I don't know if anyone's ever noticed that they never won a game when I was their agent, so I probably wasn't the best agent for them. But I enjoy the banter from the rugby boys. I love the lifestyle, and I'd like to see rugby happen. I just don't know how they're going to do it. I'm not sure. It's a bit like theatres. How do you socially distance in a scrum? I just don't know. But I'd love to see it.
Yeah. Well, see, they can get in close, but they have to wear masks and wash their hands in between. That's
the bit. I know. It's like a bucket of water put in with the ball.
Wash it every time. And Sarah, what about you? Anything particular you're looking forward to?
So I cover a lot of boxing, and I can't wait to be back ringside of a big fight. The feeling when people are about to ring walk, that kind of anticipation. When you really just don't know what is going to happen. There's something quite magical about that. And I don't know when that's going to be. Potentially in Eddie Hearn's back garden in a couple of weeks for his first pay-per-view event. But yeah, obviously there won't be a crowd, which will be slightly different. But yeah, just being ringside at a big fight, I'm looking forward to it.
Sarah, can I just ask you, when and if it ever happens, I guess it will happen at some point, AJ or Tyson Fury?
That's a very heart versus head question for me, I'm afraid, because I've dealt with AJ quite a lot ever since the Olympics, and he's genuinely, as he comes across, just a very, very nice bloke who hasn't really changed. But on the technical side of things, Tyson Fury is an exceptional boxer, and it's very difficult to see how AJ beats him, when Klitschko couldn't do it. I just, it's probably, I have to side with Fury, but I would love to see Joshua win it.
That's brilliant. And I obviously can't wait to get back to the most important weekend football that I get to watch, which is my son's under-13s Maccabi League team, HMH Galaxy, which I get to co-manage. And that's where, whatever passion I feel about going to football with my team, seeing your own kid play and getting to watch them go through those emotions, there's still that parent-child bit of connecting over football, and any sport is something absolutely magical that hopefully we can't wait till they allow that back.
I couldn't agree with you more, by the way. My boys, Ross and Scott, both play football, and I loved that was for all the big successes and all the whatever it was with Diego and the England team and the Freddie Ljungbergs and everyone else in this world and Ruud Gullit. Go and watch my boys play.
Well, that's a really wonderful note. We've come to the end of 90 minutes, just poetically enough. And I want to thank you both for giving your time on a very warm evening when you've been probably in front of your computers on Zoom meetings and all of that all day long. So to give us your time, to donate your time generously to us has been, we're really grateful for. And we've had hundreds of people watching via the Zoom, via YouTube, via Facebook, and many more people over the week to come. So thank you both. I hope you have a great season ahead for all the teams that you love and you get to watch them. I encourage any of you watching, if you haven't come across either John's book or either of Sarah's books, do look them up. We mentioned them at the start. We've stuck them in the chat. Just look them up and get them. If you want to read some really great writing from the inside of sport, very, very different books. I highly recommend them. And all I say to anyone else watching is just that reminder that this was another event we've been putting on, like hundreds of others that are free. We're putting them on for you to enjoy free. If you have a few pounds change, maybe you haven't been going to work, so you haven't been or going into the office, you haven't been buying your coffee every week, and you've saved a few pounds. If you can afford to spare a few pounds for a community centre that is doing so much great work at the moment, please go to the JW3 website, click on donate. If it's £1, if it's £100, anywhere in between, we'd be really grateful. That helps us keep doing the great work that we do. So thank you, everyone. Stay safe and good night. And I think it's customary at the end of any Zoom to wave. I don't know why, but that's what everyone does. So it's the Celebrity Squares time. Thank you, everyone. Good night.